G'day everyone. Something that I'm often asked is how can I make my lure cast further? Now I'm going to give you a few tips to help you increase your casting distance when fishing with lures. Yet they're going mad! Finally! The first tip I'm going to give you to maximise your casting distance is to choose a lure that will cut through the air really easily. In the case of today's exercise, I'm using this. That is a blade. This particular model is a TT switchblade. It's 7 grams, but it's also really skinny. It's thin like a knife, so it will literally cut through the air and won't get much resistance. So it'll cut, even despite the fact that it's quite a windy day, it will cut through the wind and it'll cast further. So on the same setup with the soft plastic, I might not get the same casting distance. On the same setup with a bladed spinner, I might not get the same casting distance. On the same setup with a bibbed minnow or something that's got a bib that can catch the wind, I definitely won't get the same casting distance. So tip number 1 is to choose a lure that will cut through the air the best. Rightio folks, now tip number 2 is to have a full spool of line. The fuller your spool is, the further your lure will cast. Now, I suggest you avoid using backing. Some of the older people will encourage you to put heavy line underneath so that you don't need to use as much line on your reel. But the way I look at that is that if you've got 2 different lines on your reel, that means that you've got a knot. And if you've got a knot, I can guarantee that when you cast, as the line is coming off your spool, it will catch on that knot and it will slow your lure down and hinder your casting distance. I avoid backing at any time. I would rather only have half a spool of line than have a full spool with a knot in the middle of it. So a full spool of the one lot of line, light line, the thinner you can get the better. I've got Panther Power on here at the moment. I usually use Maxima Ultra Green. I didn't have any in the shed, but this Panther Power is fantastic line because it's really thin, and it's thin for its strength. So because it's thinner, it will cast further. The problem I have, I underestimated just how thin it was, and I thought I had enough to fill my spool, and I put the entire spool on here on my reel, and if you look here you can see that I've still got room for another 2 or 3 millimeters of line to go on there. So the spool isn't full. That is going to hinder my casting distance shortly. So a full spool of light line is the way to go. Now tip number 3 is the actual reel itself. I'm using a Shimano Stratic CI4, but I'm using the 2500 size. The 1000 size is a great little reel and it casts really well and it's great on light gear, but for the maximum casting distance, I actually believe that a slightly larger spool enables the lure to cast that little bit further, and that's why I've gone up to the 2500 size. Rightio, now tip number 4 is the actual fishing rod itself, and this is the most important part, because if you choose a rod that's really whippy and a fiberglass rod or something like that, it's not going to cast as far. You want length. The longer your rod is, the further it will cast, and the stiffer it is, the further it will cast. A 7'6" or an 8-foot long graphite rod is going to give you the maximum casting distance, but it may not be practical in other waterways. So you want something that's practical for your specific needs. In my case, I've got a wild bait stick. It's 6'6". It's quite a stiff rod and it casts very well. If I specifically wanted a rod for a certain lake where I had to always maximise my casting distance, I may want a longer, stiffer rod. If I specifically wanted a rod for a small stream, I might want a smaller rod that doesn't need to cast as far. So this is a great all-rounder, but if casting distance is the main thing that you need, go for a rod that's really long and really stiff, and then choose the line weight according to the fish species that you're targeting. For example, if you're targeting trout and you want casting distance, you might want something that's 7 foot long or 7'6", graphite rod, 1 to 2 kilograms or 2 to 4 pound or something light like that. If you're targeting Murray cod from the bank and you want casting distance, you might want a 7'6" rod that's 5 to 6 kilograms or 6 to 8 kilograms. Long, graphite, stiff, excellent casting distance. So the longer and the stiffer the rod, the further it will cast. Now we get to the actual cast itself. Casting a fishing rod a long way is a bit like trying to hit a golf ball a long way. It's not always about how much oomph you put into the swing. It's about the timing, and casting is the same. I find that to start slow, then speed the cast up as I go, that way I'm not just giving it an almighty heave, I'm starting slow, then speeding up and letting go at the right time. That is how I maximise my casting distance, and I'll give you a demonstration of that. I've got about 2 feet of line out. The further the line, the more line you've got out, the better, to an extent. Once you get too much line out, you actually start losing casting distance and you increase your chances of casting your lure straight up in the sky. So with an egg beater reel, I've got about 2 feet of line out. That's normally a good all-round sort of distance to have out for most rods. Now I'll start slow, then I'll speed my cast up and then let go at the right time. That has landed within about 8 feet of that other bank. Right, so that cast almost went all the way across this waterway. I think if this spool was full, that would have gone all the way across. Despite this really strong westerly wind that I'm casting into, I was still able to cast really, really far.